While we sleep, the guardians of the night take to the streets, having said goodbye to those they love. Each other knowing they may never say these words again, they face the evil that we run from. They dedicate their lives to those that would hate them because they wear the badge. They wear the badge not for the glory or recognition, but because they were born to honor the thin blue line. This is the LEO First Podcast. We'll talk to the men and women in law enforcement, those that have retired, and anyone who's impacted by law enforcement. We'll peel back the curtain, and you'll get the real stories. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Every law enforcement officer has a story to tell. Get ready to hear from the men and women who put their lives on the line every day for their communities and their country. Welcome to the LEO First Podcast. Now, here's your host, Michael Laidler.
Hey everybody, it's Michael Laidler, your host of the LEO First Podcast, and we're coming back to you for another round of information that I really think you're going to enjoy. Today, I have a guest that I met on LinkedIn. You know, my favorite platform for finding guests now. I am starting to use Instagram a little bit more. So if you haven't checked me out on Instagram, go to Michael Laidler. I'm also starting to use YouTube. I'm doing all of these things to help spread awareness and promote the brand. So if you don't have me on either of those platforms, please go add me, share, push, and keep going. You guys know I'm still doing my keynote speaking. I'm still doing my coaching, but what we're here for right now is going to be for this amazing podcast. Now, today we have a former law enforcement officer that hasn't stopped his push or his desire to increase. He's a published author. He's a father. He's a person that I like to see do early on in their career when they go from the government sector to the private sector. Our guest today is Colin Whittington. And yes, I know I got it right because I had to pause for a second, and we're not, we don't edit stuff out, but let me give you guys a quick background, an actual, some numbers. I know everybody loves numbers, especially in law enforcement. Currently he runs the Recruiting Heroes LLC program, where they are designed to help agencies hire staff, which, everybody needs help there. And if you need someone to help streamline that, Colin's your guy. And they also help LEOs and veterans transition from the private sector to the public sector, which we know and I know is tough. I wish back when I first started several years ago, get my foot into the private door, or the public, or the private sector door, public to private, that I had somebody or a group that can help me transition. So Colin does that as Recruiting Heroes. He's also been the 2019 Virginia Deputy of the Year. Guys, I've never been anything of the year. So the fact that he was able to do a whole deputy with 1,500 plus of them, that's impressive in its own. And then he has just published a book on Amazon. I'm sure you can probably find it in other places, but I would say definitely Amazon, because he's a bestseller there. And that book is called Beyond the Thin Blue Line. And that also focuses on career strategies for law enforcement officers. So you guys know we have a guest on here that has an LE background, but is also using that to springboard a lot of us to continue on our path, because we all have that question: what do we do after law enforcement? So Colin, it's your time. Tell us who you are and what you want to talk about.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really honored to be here and loving your stuff. So I hope everyone follows you in the after they watch this podcast. But yeah, like you said, my name is Colin Whittington. I spent nearly 8 years in law enforcement. I was a deputy sheriff in Loudoun County, Virginia. Absolutely love my time in law enforcement. Spent a lot of time on patrol, community policing. I was the agency's PIO for a number of years, and then got promoted to sergeant and got put in charge of the background investigation and recruiting unit, which is where I fell in love with recruiting. As you mentioned, I was the 2019 Deputy Sheriff of the Year for all of Virginia, which was pretty amazing for me and my family and the agency. Ended up leaving law enforcement in 22 and joined the tech industry as a recruiter. Immediately knew that wasn't quite for me. And I started getting messages on LinkedIn. You mentioned LinkedIn is one of my favorite platforms as well. Getting messages from cops, deputies, veterans asking for their help, asking for my help to help them transition to the private sector, which is how I came up with the idea of Recruiting Heroes. Started off as a side hustle, really was only doing it for, the plan was to do it on the side for a few hours a week. it got so freaking busy within like 2 months that I had to quit my full-time job just to keep up with the demand there. And now we help law enforcement agencies with their recruiting and also helping you Leos and you veterans with your transition to the private sector. So that's resume writing, LinkedIn stuff, interviewing, salary negotiations, you name it. We do all of it. And like you mentioned as well, I just published my first book. It's called Beyond the Thin Blue Line. Like you said, mentioned bestseller on Amazon, which is really cool. And it's all about helping you transition to the private sector and all the intricacies that go into it. That way, law enforcement officers can have a successful career beyond the badge as well.
And that's cool, man. Because I'm a book writer too. Well, I'm an author. I wrote Greatness Beyond the Badge, and it's kind of like you just get that feeling like once you write a book that you're like, man, I was able to do it. So I'm trying to think about if I want to ask this question yet about your book, because I was thinking about something else. And when you said, whenever I hear about book and authors, I get excited, and I will get your book, and I'll order it probably by the time we get off this call. There's something on LinkedIn I wanted to highlight to place an extra emphasis on how you went from working on resume writing and recruiting for several hours to now making a full-blown business. Now, folks, if you haven't added him on LinkedIn yet, please go add him. What you're going to see right now, which is very cool, is LinkedIn came up with this new concept called Top Voices. And on Colin's profile, he's actually a top resume writing voice. So what LinkedIn has said that based on what he has posted about resume writing, the frequency, and what he's already helped people with, and that's at least 16,000 followers that he has, is that he's good at it. A lot of us, our resumes suck. Let's just call it what it is. Colin is your guy. Please go over there. And if you're thinking about anything, even if you're in law enforcement, you're thinking about going from one PD to the other, or you're thinking about going to a sheriff's office, or you're thinking about getting in corrections or out of corrections, you need a good resume. You need something that speaks for you when you're not there. A lot of us, and when I was younger, I fell in the same trap. I would say, you know what? My work will show everything. No, what the resume is going to show as well, because you're not always going to be able to sit at that table with the 3 or 4 people that are deciding if they're going to even interview you. Your resume speak words. Colin is the guy, the man, especially based on LinkedIn, that can do that. So, okay, that was a quick plug for you, Colin. Let me stop plugging.
Thank you. I
Let's
appreciate
go.
it.
Yeah. All right, so let's get back to the book. How has actually publishing the book changed your life?
Oh, it's been wild. It's only been a few weeks since I published it, but I've been getting messages, pictures, reviews from officers and just normal citizens, honestly, all over the world. I got a message from an officer in Australia the other day, Ireland, Brazil, you name it. I was actually contacted by an agency, a law enforcement agency in Ireland. So I'm going to Ireland to speak at a conference in September. It's been wild. The influx of business has been amazing, but most importantly to me is the law enforcement officers who have read it and are saying that it's really made a big change in their life, and it's helping them with their career transition. As you mentioned, a lot of us officers, we kind of suck at selling ourselves. We suck at resume writing. And just the idea of switching from a career where we've probably spent, some officers have spent 3 decades in it. A lot of people join this profession at 18 or 21 years of age and have never applied for a quote unquote normal job before. So we just don't know how to make that transition. And this book is really going to give you a step-by-step guide. Part of it is literally a 6-month roadmap. So if you have 6 months left in law enforcement, this is what you do. 6 months out, you do this. 5 months out, you do this, and all the way up to the last day to make sure that you can approach your career transition with confidence and that you feel ready to go. And you mentioned resumes. It's a powerful tool. They say that an average recruiter looks at a resume for 7.4 seconds before deciding if they want to move forward with you. So you have 7.4 seconds to make an impression. And these companies will look at your resume and decide whether or not to move forward with you and interview you. So if your resume sucks and it's not getting your message across, your chance of getting an interview are slim to none. And then you're going to have a hard time finding your next opportunity. So making your resume count is massive.
And it's what people have to realize when it comes to resume writing, to place a stronger emphasis on this. Depending on where you're going to go, especially if it's outside of law enforcement, those folks that work in the private sector are even more heavy on the resume. Like some agencies, just that you have your certification in law enforcement, that's a big start. But if you're like, you know what, I'm tired because I've already worked in law enforcement for 20, 25 years, or you know what, this just isn't for me and I want to go to the private sector. Those recruiters, the ones that are only reading it for 7 seconds, they're reading a lot of resumes and they're gonna be kind of impressed that you were in law enforcement, but they really want to see how things are written, how you're selling yourself quickly. So you literally have 7 seconds to build that. So Colin, one thing I know people will ask, and obviously you still love the industry and you appreciate it and you want to see people build, but you're not in it anymore. So what built your desire to go from working as a deputy sheriff, especially deputy of the year in 2019, to now actually opening the business and leaving? Because obviously you're a younger guy, meaning that you're not like in your 50s or 60s and you're on your way out, but you decided to do this early on. What was at least one of the driving forces that said, you know what, I could be more impactful to law enforcement outside of it than inside of it? What happened to get you to that point?
Yeah, it was interesting. Law enforcement has obviously taken it on the chin pretty hard the last couple of years with some major incidents that have happened. So that was a small factor of it. The financial part was a small factor, but really I just started realizing that, I knew my time in law enforcement was done. I'd accomplished a lot, even though it had only been 7.5, 8 years or so. I just kind of knew that I wanted to see what else was out there in the world. And now I feel like I'm making more of an impact, even more of an impact now than I was in law enforcement. Then I was working as a deputy in a county, in a small county outside of DC, and having an immediate impact there. But seeing the fact that I'm now helping officers all over the United States and all over the world it's just mind blowing, and I'm so honored to be able to do this and to be a small part in officers' lives. And it's for me, it was a great decision. And I mentioned in the book and my speeches that I give as well that if someone reads my book or hears me talk and decides that they want to stay in law enforcement, that's awesome. With this industry and this profession needs the very best people. But I also fully believe that if your time in law enforcement is done, I want to give you all the tools and resources to make that transition and to be happy in the private sector, because it is a scary transition. And so many Leos come to me saying, Colin, I can't be a fit for anything in the private sector. I don't know what I'm doing. Or that they're only a fit for roles in security type of roles. And that's just not the case. And that's not a diss at security at all. But there are so many industries out there that would love to hire you. And it's just all about how you articulate your background and your skill set. And that's something I really dive into in my book, and really help. I believe it really is going to help you to see the worth you have and what you can bring to companies in a host of industries, not just security.
In full transparency, and yes, I'm going to say this on the air, and when I'm not going to edit it out or I'm not going to modify it. I had somebody come up to me just this past week, and this particular person, they are about 6 months out of retirement, and they asked me the question like, hey, how do I do it? What do I do? Because they see what I'm doing, and I don't have a well-written formula or plan. So Colin, as you say this, I'm about to refer them to you. Actually, when we get off this video, this podcast, I'm going to send you this person's name, because that's Perfect. Something that has to be learned how to be built. Because honestly, what you just talked about, I was just thinking, well, maybe they could do, because the person's like, I don't really want to do law enforcement. I don't want to do security. Like, right. I have a doctor's degree and I've been a CEO at the highest level, but all I can think about is security. And sometimes that's all we know, because like you mentioned, a lot of us start off young. I started in law enforcement at 19. I have only had, outside of my business, government jobs for the last 20 years. Like, it is scary, because going into the private sector, it's at least in the government sector, I will say, you're at least guaranteed a check every 2 weeks. As long as you just come and do your job, the basics, and you don't violate anybody's rights, you don't violate policy, you're going to at least get paid. The private sector is a little tougher, but if you have a well-written resume and you're designed to succeed, you're going to be able to withstand that. Because if a company just lays you off because they're running out of money or they're doing a shuffle, that's nothing you can do. But if you're that marketable, you're going to find a role that suits you very quickly, because there are a lot of jobs. I mean, I don't know what the unemployment rate is, but I always feel like people are always hiring. So If they're hiring, they need somebody. But the cool part about it, if you have the right resume, it goes a far way with getting you there. So you've left law enforcement as far as being a deputy, wearing a uniform. One thing I always love to highlight is how that has impacted your family. So, how for you, Colin, being able to work from home, work in the private sector, not worried about getting shot at, not worried about going to a traffic stop and getting assaulted, being home, no shift work. How has that changed your life as a person?
It's definitely been a major improvement in a lot of ways. Law enforcement was a wonderful career, but like you mentioned, I was gone on holidays, gone overnight. Missed really special events with my family. Held out late on Christmas Eve because one of my buddies got shot. So it definitely was for me, it was a really good transition. Both my family getting to see me more, as well as my own personal well-being. I mentioned in my book a little bit too, and it's something that I think hopefully people can feel more comfortable sharing in general. Was during my time in law enforcement, I would wake up in the middle of the night just from night terrors, and I'd be wandering through my house, or yelling in my sleep, or whatever else, and um, that's all pretty much stopped since I left law enforcement. So it's been for me, it's been very good for my own personal physical mental health, but also for my family too, getting to spend more time with me. And again, I hope that's something that people feel more comfortable sharing because it's a major part of the industry. And I've had a really good friend of mine that unfortunately died by suicide. So one thing my company does, and I do, we donate 20% of all of our revenue to the PTSD Foundation of America, which helps veterans and first responders who are suffering from PTSD from the things that they've seen during their service. So that's a big thing I always try to push as well, is just take care of yourself, take care of your buddies and your family as well, and just think about that part of it too. But to answer your question, the transition for me has been really, really solid, and it's been great to be around my family more. The work from home is really nice, but also get a chance to travel and spread this message to places other than my home state is great as well.
Now, I know you've been you've been out of the field for like 2 years, I guess, with uniform on. Do you still sit in the corner at restaurants?
I still do. I still have my back to the wall, looking at the door. It's definitely something that's very bizarre. You never totally lose it. I mentioned in my book too, and that was one of my first month out of law enforcement. I really didn't even think about the fact that I was no longer a cop. I was still acting the same way, going to my private sector job. But then one morning, I was just like on autopilot, just kind of exhausted, just going through the motions. And I was getting dressed for work. And as I was getting dressed, I went and instinctively reached to the hook where I used to keep my gun belt. Without thinking about it, I went to put it on, and obviously the gun belt's no longer there. So that's when it fully hit me that I wasn't an officer anymore, a deputy anymore. But at the same time, that feeling of being part of the thin blue line never fully leaves you. And whenever I have a chance to speak to an officer or a deputy, it still brings me back to the good old days too. So no, that I think that'll stay with me forever. Sitting in the corners, looking at the door, and just that general awareness that we get as officers will always be with you.
And I will tell you, from speaker to speaker, the cool part about speaking everywhere and across the world, I mean, you're going to Ireland in September, is when you hear the good stories coming from people, you can still relate. And you can still have that almost a level of satisfaction without having the danger associated with it. You're not on foot pursuits, you're not writing traffic crash reports, but when someone tells you what's going on with them, or you see someone in uniform, you take a photo, like you still get a piece of satisfaction. So that's something I tell people, like, even though you're out of it, you're not completely out of it. You're not worried about getting shot at. You're not worried about, hey, that's Officer Laitler or that's Deputy Whittington. Like, you just don't get that. You don't have that fear. And you know that you're still making a positive impact. So if somebody was looking to find you and they wanted to reach out, what would be the best way for that to happen?
Yeah, so I'm most active on LinkedIn for sure. So it's Colin Whittington on LinkedIn. I am on Instagram. I'm trying to get started there. So give me some time. I'll work on that. But it's Whittington Books there. And then I have two websites. One is my business website, which is recruitingheroesllc.com. There you can hear all about our services as far as resume writing, LinkedIn profile optimization, interview training, you name it. It's all there. If you're interested in the book as well, my author website is whittingtonbooks.com. And there you can also hear more about my story, about the book, about our services. And the book is on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Nobles and a few other places as well. So those are the main places to find me.
Perfect. Well, you outlined that really good. Guys, LinkedIn, he ain't ready for Instagram yet. Don't worry. We talked about that. The guys, I'm building my Instagram. You guys might see 7,000 followers, but that 7,000 struggling. There's people with 100 and 200K. That's what we're trying to get to. So Follow him on Instagram too, because if you follow him, you might go ahead and follow me. So I'm trying to play off that. But go to his book, Whittington Books. Go grab a book, guys. Trust me. Like I said, I'm going to go grab one. I promise you that. Colin, any final words?
No, as for all my law enforcement officers listening to your podcast here, just know that there is life outside the uniform. A lot of officers think that they're stuck or not able to like make that transition. That's absolutely not the case. I've seen officers have amazing careers in the private sector, and it's fully possible for you as well. And for the agency, just know that recruiting will get better. Keep making a real effort to try to treat your employees well. And make sure that you're trying to attract the very best candidates, and we can help with both of those things. So reach out to me if I can ever be of any assistance. I'm always here. And if you're going through a tough time yourself, please reach out as well. I'd much rather take your phone call than have to hear about something tragic happening in your life.
Well, you all heard it, and maybe you guys will see it once this video posts as well. Reach out to Colin if you're trying to figure out if the private sector is for you. More than likely it is. You just need a little bit of help to get there. You just need a little bit of a push. And if you go with the recruiting heroes, they're going to help you at least get to your resume. Now, the interview and some other stuff you got to do on your own, but at least let the paper get you to the desk. At least allow what you've done in your amazing careers to get you there. If you're ready to do that transition, he's your guy. Get his book. Do what you guys got to do. But at the end of the day, we are all people. We are all individuals that have sacrificed something in our life to promote this field, whether it's within the uniform, out of it, whether we're a family member or someone that's just passionate. And because of that, we owe it to ourselves to be ready for anything that comes up in our careers, especially. We don't need to think that we're not good enough or we're not designed to be that person for a company. Trust me, guys, a lot of organizations actually like law enforcement because even if you spent a year in it, at least gives another company an idea that you can handle stress, because it's a stressful industry no matter what. I mean, I've heard people tell me and come on the show and say in their first month, they went to homicides or they went and saw dead bodies or they've had to break up fights. And if you're an accountant, and I'm sorry if I have an accountant on here, if you're an accountant, you're not seeing that, which is good. But the fact that if you have seen it, there's not many more things that are going to stress you out in the private sector. So a lot of you guys are much more qualified than what you believe. So get with Colin, get with his team over Recruiting Heroes, and allow them to help get you to that level you need to. Guys, that's going to wrap up the show. If you haven't had a chance, make sure you go find the podcast, whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, for my iPhone friends, Apple Music. And I have an iPhone, so that's why I'm going to say my iPhone friends. But go on there, guys, subscribe, like, share. We will have this posted soon. You guys will see some videos. Make sure we get this message out there. But career transition is important, and you don't have to face it alone. And if that stress gets up in any part of your life, you have at least 2 more people you can reach out to. You know you can always reach out to me, but now you have Colin. He's where we want to see you guys get through that stress. So thank you guys for watching. Colin, thank you for being on the show. Thank you for taking the time today away from your family to spread a message that I think is very important, because career changes is very scary. So thank you for all of that. And thank you guys. If you guys need anything else from me or Colin, reach out. But if not, y'all have a great day.
You've been listening to the LEO First Podcast. Michael has been in law enforcement since 2005. He's worked for 3 law enforcement agencies in 3 different states. He's a professional speaker who travels the country teaching about leadership development and self-awareness. And he's the author of a book called Greatness Beyond the Badge: The 3 Key Principles for Self-Awareness. It's Michael's passion to bring law enforcement members' stories to the front, so you get the real and raw take. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Michael on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Michael Laidler, on Twitter at Michael A. Laidler, on Facebook at Michael Laidler Leadership. Send an email to michael@michaellaidler.com and hit the website at michaellaidler.com. See you next time on the LEO First Podcast.